On a Thursday afternoon in October of 1993, in the ruins of the Monongahela Valley Steel Mill, number 7, on the outskirts of Pittsburgh, Fire Chief Ronald Metcalf stood at the edge of a hole and made a decision that would cost the city $750,000. "Write it off," he said. The hole was 20 feet across and 12 feet deep. 3 days earlier, when the abandoned mill caught fire, the Pittsburgh Fire Department had responded with everything they had. The blaze was massive, 5-alarm, visible for miles, hot enough to warp the steel beams that had once supported the mill's roof. During the response, Battalion Chief Tom Brennan had positioned Ladder 23 on the second floor to attack the fire from above. The ladder truck weighed 75,000 pounds fully loaded. The second floor was reinforced concrete, rated for industrial equipment. Nobody knew the floor had been weakening for years. Water damage, structural neglect, decades of temperature cycling that had fractured the concrete from the inside. At 2:17 a.m., the floor gave way. Ladder 23 went through like a stone through ice. 75,000 pounds of fire truck, crew cab, aerial ladder, and equipment dropped 12 feet into the basement, which had been filling with water from broken pipes for 3 days. The crew got out, bruised, shaken, but alive. They climbed the basement stairs and watched their truck settle into 4 feet of standing water. Now, 3 days later, Chief Metcalf stood with structural engineers, insurance adjusters, and city officials, looking at a $750,000 ladder truck sitting in a flooded basement inside a building that was 90% collapsed. "The building's unstable," said the lead structural engineer, a man named Carson who wore a hard hat and carried a tablet computer. "We can't bring heavy equipment inside. The remaining floor sections could collapse at any moment." "What about crane access from outside?" Metcalf asked. "No clear line of sight. The truck's under what's left of the third floor. We'd have to demolish the entire south wall first, which could bring down the rest of the structure." "So what are our options?" Carson looked at his tablet. "Demolish the building carefully, section by section, over the next 6 weeks. Maybe we can extract the truck during that process. Maybe." 6 weeks, Metcalf's face reddened. "We are down a ladder truck for 6 weeks while we demolish a building. Or we write it off now and order a replacement." The insurance adjuster, a woman named Patricia Chen, cleared her throat. "Given the structural instability and recovery costs, I'd recommend total loss. We'll process the claim and you can order a new truck within 90 days. Metcalf looked at the hole, at the dark water below, at the dim shape of Ladder 23 sitting in the basement like a submarine. "All right," he said, "tag it as total loss, get the demolition scheduled." That's when Vincent Kowalski showed up. Let me tell you about Vinny, because understanding the man is the only way to understand what happened next. Vincent Kowalski was 79 years old in 1993. He'd been born in Pittsburgh in 1914, the son of Polish immigrants who'd come to America to work the steel mills. His father, Joseph, everyone called him Big Joe, had started as a furnace tender at Homestead Works in 1910 and worked his way up to yard supervisor by 1930. Vinny had grown up in the shadow of the mills. The sound of drop hammers and blast furnaces was the soundtrack of his childhood. By the time he was 16, he was working alongside his father, learning to move heavy equipment, to rig loads, to understand weight distribution and leverage, and the physics of industrial machinery. In 1933, during the Depression, Vinny got a job with a bridge construction crew. They were building the Fort Pitt Bridge, and the work involved moving massive steel components in conditions where one mistake meant death. Vinny learned crane operation, cable rigging, and heavy recovery. When equipment broke down or fell into the river, Vinny was part of the crew that pulled it out. In 1947, when the war ended and industrial work picked up again, Vinny bought a 1947 Autocar DC-102 wrecker from a construction company that was liquidating assets. Paid $1,800 cash. The Autocar was built for heavy industrial recovery, simple, strong, designed to move equipment that weighed more than most buildings. Vinny had been running Kowalski Heavy Recovery for 46 years. He'd pulled furnaces out of steel mills, cranes out of rivers, locomotives off tracks. He'd worked every major industrial accident in Pittsburgh for half a century. He was supposed to be retired. His son kept telling him to sell the business, sell the truck, take it easy. But Vinny couldn't let go. The Autocar was family. More than family, it was the last connection to his father, to Big Joe, to a Pittsburgh that didn't exist anymore except in the bones of old machinery. On that Thursday afternoon, Vinny heard about Ladder 23 on his police scanner, heard the fire department discussing demolition timelines and insurance claims, heard Chief Metcalf say the words, "Write it off." Vinny put on his work jacket, started the Autocar. It fired on the second try and drove to Monongahela Valley Steel Mill No. 7. The fire crew saw him coming. First the sound, a deep mechanical rumble that modern trucks don't make. Then the truck itself, a boxy, old-fashioned wrecker with a riveted boom and dual rear wheels, painted dark red with KOWALSKI Heavy Recovery in faded white letters. Chief Metcalf walked over as Vinny climbed down from the cab. "Site's closed," Metcalf said, "not rude, just official. Active demolition planning, insurance liability." "I heard," Vinny said. His voice was rough, shaped by decades of shouting over industrial noise. "Thought I might be able to help." Metcalf looked at the Autocar, looked at Vinny, looked back at the Autocar. "Help with what?" "Pulling out your ladder truck." Metcalf actually laughed. Not mean, just surprised. "Sir, we've got structural engineers saying it can't be done. The building's unstable, the truck's underwater. We can't even get equipment inside safely." "I heard that too," Vinny said, "but I've been pulling equipment out of worse situations for 50 years. With that, Metcalf pointed at the Autocar. "That truck's got to be, 45 years old?" 46, Vinny said. "Built in 1947, she's pulled heavier." Carson, the structural engineer, walked over. "Chief, we can't allow unauthorized personnel." "I know," Metcalf said. He looked at Vinny. "Mr. Kowalski, Vinny Kowalski." "Mr. Kowalski, I appreciate the offer, but we're talking about a 75,000-pound vehicle in a flooded basement inside a structurally compromised building. Our engineers say it's impossible." "Your engineers are probably right about most things," Vinny said calmly, "but they're thinking like engineers. I'm thinking like a steelworker." "What's the difference?" "Let engineers calculate what's safe. Steelworkers figure out what's necessary." Metcalf was quiet for a moment. He looked at the hole, at the $750,000 loss, at his crew standing around with nothing to do. "You touch that building and something goes wrong. The city's not liable." "Understood," Vinny said. "And if your truck gets stuck or damaged, we're not responsible." "Don't need you to be." Metcalf stepped aside. "All right, show me." Vinny walked back to the Autocar. The fire crew watched. Some pulled out cameras. This was either going to be brilliant or a disaster. Let me tell you about the 1947 Autocar DC-1, 2, because understanding the machine is the only way to understand what Vinny did next. The DC-102 was built in Ardmore, Pennsylvania in 1947 for heavy industrial service. It had a straight-six gasoline engine that made about 125 horsepower, nothing impressive by modern standards, but the power wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the boom. The DC-102's boom was built from riveted steel I-beams, 15 feet tall when raised, with a lifting capacity of 20,000 pounds at full extension. The boom was operated by a mechanical winch driven off the power takeoff, with a 4-stage planetary gear reduction that multiplied pulling force by a factor of 16. No hydraulics, no computers, just steel cable, cast iron gears, and a hand clutch that let the operator control every inch of movement. More importantly, the boom was built to handle side loads. Most modern wreckers were designed for vertical lifts, straight up. The autocar was designed for industrial work, where loads came from any angle and the operator had to compensate for building structures, uneven ground, and shifting weight. Vinny had spent 46 years learning to read those loads, learning to feel through the cable and the boom what the weight was doing, how it was shifting, where the stress was concentrating. He positioned the autocar about 30 feet from the collapsed section, on the first floor where the concrete was still solid. Then he climbed out and began his assessment. He spent 20 minutes just walking around the hole, studying it from different angles. He looked at the exposed rebar in the broken concrete. He looked at the water level in the basement. He looked at what remained of the second and third floors overhead. Then he did something that made Carson, the engineer, actually gasp. He climbed down into the basement. "Sir," Carson shouted, "that's not safe. The structure could collapse at any moment." Vinny didn't respond. He waded through 4 feet of cold water, over to where ladder 23 sat at an angle, its rear wheels on solid basement floor, its front end tilted down into deeper water. He spent 10 minutes examining the truck, touching the frame, checking the attachment points, measuring angles with his eyes. Then he waded back and climbed out. "Can you pull it?" Metcalf asked. "Yes," Vinny said simply. "How?" "Same way I pulled a locomotive out of the Allegheny River in 1968. Weight distribution, rigging angles, and patience." He walked back to the autocar and began setting up. First, he positioned wooden cribbing, massive oak beams he'd carried in the truck bed, beneath the autocar's frame. The cribbing distributed the truck's weight across a larger area, preventing the floor from concentrating stress at any single point. Then he extended the boom manually, hand-cranking it upward with a ratchet mechanism that clicked with each inch of travel. When the boom was fully raised, he locked it in position with a heavy steel pin. Next came the rigging. Vinny pulled out cable that looked older than some of the firefighters watching. 3/4-inch steel cable, hand-spliced eyes at both ends, surface rust but structurally sound. He ran the cable through a series of snatch blocks, pulleys that would redirect the pulling force and multiply it through mechanical advantage. The fire crew watched in silence now. What had seemed like an old man with an old truck was revealing itself as something else entirely. A master craftsman setting up a solution to a problem the engineers said was impossible. Vinny walked one end of the cable down into the basement, waded through the water again, and attached it to ladder 23's frame at a specific point he'd identified during his inspection. When he climbed back out, he was soaked from the waist down and breathing hard. 79 years old, climbing in and out of flooded basements. "You all right?" one of the firefighters asked. "Fine," Vinny said. "Did this kind of thing before you were born." He walked back to the autocar, climbed into the cab, and started the winch. The sound was different from modern equipment. Slower, deeper, a rhythmic clanking as the planetary gears engaged and the cable drum began to turn. The cable went taut. The snatch blocks took the load. The autocar's frame settled onto the wooden cribbing with a groan. For 30 seconds, nothing visible happened. Then ladder 23 moved. Not much, an inch, maybe 2, but it moved. "Holy," someone said. The ladder truck began to tilt upward. The front end, which had been angled down into deep water, began to rise. Water poured off the truck like a waterfall. Vinny kept the winch turning, steady, patient, no sudden pulls, no jerking movements. 3 inches, 6 inches. The ladder truck was rotating now, the front wheels lifting from the basement floor. Metcalf took a step forward. "It's working." 1 foot, 2 feet. The truck was nearly level now. The rear wheels, still on solid basement floor, were taking most of the weight. The front end was clear of the water. Vinny stopped the winch, climbed down, waded back into the basement, the third time, and repositioned the cable to a different attachment point. Back to the autocar, winch engaged again. This time the entire truck began to move horizontally, not lifting straight up, but sliding across the basement floor toward the stairs that led to the first floor. The engineers were writing frantically on their tablets. The fire crew was filming. Chief Metcalf was shaking his head slowly. 10 feet, 20 feet. Ladder 23 was at the base of the stairs now. Vinny stopped again, repositioned again. This time, he rigged the cable through additional snatch blocks to create a different mechanical advantage. The fourth pull lifted the front of ladder 23 onto the first step. The fifth pull lifted it to the second step. It took 40 minutes total, 4 repositionings, constant adjustment, absolute patience. When ladder 23 finally rolled onto the first floor, water still pouring from its compartments, the fire crew erupted. They weren't cheering. Professional firefighters don't cheer. But they were clapping, nodding, looking at each other with expressions that said the same thing. We just watched something impossible happen. Vinny shut down the winch, set the brake, and climbed out of the autocar. He began coiling up his cable without ceremony. Chief Metcalf walked over. How, Metcalf said, we had engineers, we had structural analysis, we had computer models that said this couldn't be done safely. Your engineers were right, Vinny said, still working. It couldn't be done safely by modern standards. Too many variables, too much risk, too much liability. Then how? I didn't use modern standards. I used Depression-era bridge construction techniques and 50 years of experience moving things that don't want to be moved. He patted the autocar's fender. This truck was built in 1947, same year I pulled my first crane out of the Monongahela River. She doesn't have computers or hydraulics or safety sensors, just mechanical advantage and an operator who knows what he's doing. Metcalf looked at ladder 23, sitting on solid ground, dripping but intact. What do we owe you? Nothing, Vinny said. Did it for the same reason I've been doing this for 46 years. Some things are worth saving, even when people say they're not. There's got to be something. Vinny thought for a moment. Pittsburgh Fire Museum. They're trying to restore a 1920s pumper. Donate whatever you think is fair. Metcalf pulled out his phone. Within 20 minutes, he'd authorized a $15,000 donation to the museum in Vinny Kowalski's name. Vinny nodded, climbed into the autocar, and started the engine. As he drove away, Carson, the engineer, stood with his tablet, looking at the data he'd collected. That shouldn't have worked, Carson said. The floor loading alone should have caused secondary collapse. The rigging angles violated 3 different engineering principles. But it did work, Metcalf said quietly. Yes, Carson said, it worked. But the story doesn't end there. Let me tell you what happened 6 weeks later, because that's when Vinny made the discovery. The autocar had been running rough since the steel mill recovery. Nothing major, just a slight vibration in the boom when it was under load. Vinny suspected a cracked weld somewhere in the structure. He pulled the truck into his shop, a corrugated steel building behind his house in the Strip district, and began a complete boom inspection. The boom was 15 feet of riveted I-beam construction, hollow inside for weight reduction. Vinny had inspected it hundreds of times over 46 years, but this time he was looking for hairline cracks, so he was being more thorough. He was inside the boom's base structure, flashlight in hand, when he noticed something odd. There was a sealed compartment welded into the hollow space, not part of the original design. Someone had fabricated a steel box, about 18 inches long and 12 inches wide, and welded it inside the boom structure where it would be invisible from the outside. Vinny's heart started beating faster. He spent the next hour carefully cutting through the welds with an acetylene torch. When the compartment finally opened, he found a military ammunition box, sealed with wax and wrapped in oilcloth. His hands were shaking as he opened it. Inside, a solid gold pocket watch, heavy and ornate, with an engraving on the back. To Big Joe Kowalski, Brotherhood of Teamsters, Local 249, for faithful service, 1934. A stack of documents, union organizing papers, meeting minutes, membership lists from the 1920s Homestead Steel Strike. The documents were marked confidential and showed names of workers who'd participated in labor actions that had been violent and dangerous. 3 hand-drawn maps on heavy paper showing routes through Pittsburgh with annotations, river barge route to Chicago, rail connections to Detroit, truck route avoiding state police checkpoints. The maps were dated 1927-1933, Prohibition era. And $8,500 in U.S. currency. Old bills, nothing newer than 1934. At the bottom of the box was a letter, handwritten on lined paper. To whoever finds this, my name is Joseph Kowalski. People call me Big Joe. I'm writing this in November 1934 because I might not have much time left. The steel companies have been trying to break the union, and men who organize workers have a way of disappearing. The watch is from the Brotherhood. They gave it to me for my work during the Homestead actions in 32-33. I'm proud of it. I organized 400 men to stand up for fair wages and safe conditions. The documents are records of who stood with us. If anything happens to me, these names need to be protected. The company has goons who'll go after organizers' families. The maps are from my other work. During Prohibition, I ran bootleg whiskey from river barges to speakeasies in Pittsburgh, made good money. Some of that money is here. I'm not proud of breaking the law, but I fed my family and funded the union when the Brotherhood had nothing. The money and the watch are for my son, Vincent. He's 20 years old, working the furnaces beside me. He's got good hands and a good heart. If you're reading this and Vincent is alive, give him these things and tell him his father loved him. If you're reading this and Vincent is gone, use the money to help working men. The kind of men who break their backs in the mills and get nothing but a pay envelope and a Chinese letter D, E, a TH. Some of us fought for labor, some of us bent the law to survive. I did both. God can judge me. Big Joe Kowalski, November 18, 1934. Vinny sat in his shop, holding his father's pocket watch, and cried for the first time since Big Joe had died in 1952. His father had hidden these things in 1934, had bought the Autocar's predecessor, whatever recovery vehicle, had donated its boom structure when the DC-1-2 was built in 1947, and sealed his most precious possessions inside it. Big Joe had died of a heart attack in 1952 working a furnace at Homestead Works. He'd never told Vinny about the hidden compartment. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he thought there'd be more time. But the watch, the documents, the money, the letter, they'd been inside the boom structure for 59 years waiting. Let me tell you what Vinny did with that discovery. He kept the watch, wore it every day for the rest of his life. The Union documents he donated to the Pennsylvania Labor History Museum in Harrisburg. The documents filled gaps in the historical record of the 1930s steel labor movement and provided evidence of organizing activities that had been deliberately erased from corporate records. The bootlegger maps he gave to the Senator John Hines History Center in Pittsburgh, where they became part of an exhibit on Prohibition-era Pittsburgh. The money, Vinny used it to establish the Big Joe Kowalski Memorial Scholarship at the Community College of Allegheny County for children of steelworkers and union members studying skilled trades. My father worked 2 jobs, Vinny told the scholarship committee, one legal, one not, both to take care of his family and his union brothers. The money should keep doing what he meant it to do, help working people. The Autocar stayed in Vinny's shop. He drove it for another 6 years, until 1999, when he was 85 and finally too old to climb in and out of the cab safely. You're going to kill yourself, his son said. Truck still runs, Vinny said. That's not the point. Vinny looked at the Autocar, sitting in the shop where it had sat for 52 years. Dark red paint, white lettering, the boom that had held his father's legacy for 6 decades. All right, he said, But the truck doesn't get scrapped. The Pittsburgh Fire Museum took it. They restored it carefully, keeping all of Vinnie's modifications intact. They built a display around it, the truck, Big Joe's watch, the union documents, the letter, and photographs of the Ladder 23 recovery. The plaque reads, 1947, Autocar DC 102 Wrecker. Operator, Vincent Kowalski, 1947-1999. This truck served Pittsburgh industry for 52 years, rescued Fire Department Ladder 23 from Monongahela Valley Steel Mill in 1993, and carried a steelworker's legacy hidden in its boom from 1934 to 1993. Built by working men, operated by working men, preserved for working men. Vincent Kowalski died in 2005 at the age of 91. His funeral was held at St. Stanislaus Kostka Church in the Strip District, the same church where Big Joe's funeral had been held in 1952. Chief Ronald Metcalf came, retired by then. So did 37 firefighters who'd been at the steel mill that day in 1993. The eulogy was given by Vinnie's grandson, Joseph, named after Big Joe, who worked as a structural engineer in Pittsburgh. My grandfather taught me something about engineering that they don't teach in school, Joseph said. He taught me that calculations only tell you what's safe, experience tells you what's possible, and courage tells you when to try anyway. Held up Big Joe's pocket watch. This watch has been in our family for 91 years. My great-grandfather earned it by standing up for steelworkers when standing up meant risking your life. My grandfather carried it while pulling equipment that everyone said couldn't be pulled. Now I carry it to remind me that engineering isn't just about computers and calculations. It's about understanding that some problems require old knowledge, old tools, and the willingness to get your hands dirty. After the funeral, Chief Metcalf stood outside the church with several of his former crew. I think about that day sometimes, one of them said, the day we wrote off a $750,000 truck and an old man proved us wrong. I think about it every time someone tells me something's impossible, Metcalf said. Every time an engineer shows me a computer model that says we can't do something. He was quiet for a moment. Vinnie Kowalski taught me that impossible is usually just expensive, complicated, or scary. And if you find someone who learned before those words became excuses, they'll show you that impossible is just a word. The 1947 Autocar DC-102 still sits in the Pittsburgh Fire Museum. Next to it is Big Joe's pocket watch, the union documents from the Homestead strike, and a photograph of Vinnie taken at the steel mill in 1993, covered in water and concrete dust, standing beside his truck with absolute certainty in his eyes. Every October, on the anniversary of the Ladder 23 recovery, someone from the Pittsburgh Fire Department visits the museum and leaves a Fire Department challenge coin on the truck's running board. A reminder that some things are worth saving, even when experts say they're not. That some knowledge can't be learned from computers or classrooms, only from decades of doing the work. And that sometimes, when modern engineering gives up, all you need is an old man who remembers when can't wasn't in the vocabulary and quit wasn't an option. The fire chief said nothing could pull it out. The old man fired up his 1947 Autocar and proved that Pittsburgh steel doesn't quit. It just waits for someone who remembers how to move it.